So the Porsche is broken again, and I'm pretty sure it's the worst possible scenario. Hey everybody, welcome back to Auto Anatomy. I'm Sean. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us. Listen, if you're not subscribed, click on that button and hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out. It's an absolutely free way that you can support our channel, and it really helps me know that you like the kind of things that we're making. So today we're back working on the Porsche project, and a couple of weeks ago I took it out for a spin and was able to crank it up with absolutely no problem. Went to go run some errands in it and just started running bad. And honestly, I just thought that it just kind of needed to be blown out. They'd had some cobwebs from sitting for a long time, but it almost stranded me a couple of miles from the house, and I'm afraid that I know what the answer is. On the K-jetronic fuel injection systems, there are only a handful of things that can really go wrong, but the number one thing that fails, that scares people, is the actual fuel distributor. And that's like the big round thing where all the hard lines come into, and people are just terrified that that thing's going to go out because it's like $1,000, $1,500 to rebuild. If you've watched Hoovie's Garage, you know that on his Bentley, his old Bentley, that's what ended up being the problem. It caused all kinds of issues, and I'm afraid that that's what may be going on with our Porsche. But let's dig into it a little bit, see if we can figure out what's going on, and we're going to fix it together. Let's get started. So let me take it out and show you guys what it's doing. I haven't started this thing in a long time. Look at that, fires right up. All right, so what I immediately notice is it's cold, and it always runs a little rough when it's cold, but it's kind of bucking and jerking. I really don't like the way this thing's running. Let's see if we can. Oh. All right, I'm gonna go get some miles on it and see how it does when it's warm. Okay, so the car's got a little temperature in it now. I'm gonna hit the gas, and I just want you guys to see what it's doing. There's full throttle. So let's limp this thing back to the house. Really for something like this, there can only be a couple of options. It's either ignition or fuel. And with as finicky as the fuel system is on this car, that's going to be my first guess, is that there's something wrong with it. Either we've lost fuel pressure, or an injector's clogged, or I hope that the CIS system isn't failing, because I really don't want to rebuild that thing, because that's a nightmare from what I understand. But let's get it home and see what we can find out. Okay, so we made it back to the house, and I've got a pretty good idea that the problem is probably fuel related, just because the ignition system's pretty bulletproof on this car. It's got new plugs, new wires, cap and rotor in great condition, the timing's right, so something would have to catastrophically fail, like the coil. And to be honest, coils really don't go out all that often, and when they do, they just don't start. You don't have this kind of breakup the way that it's doing. So I really think it's a fuel issue. The first thing to do, let's get out our fuel injection tester, and this is the one from Harbor Freight. It is the Maddox Basic Fuel Injection Service Kit, MHDCT 19. And this will allow us to check the fuel pressure on the DIS itself. So it's got an adapter, and I'll show you, but we'll basically put it in line with each one of the hard lines here, and it'll tell us the fuel pressure that's coming out of the top side of the CIS little fuel distributor. These injectors need about 80 psi in order to open, and they really are running non-stop, so we shouldn't have a pulse. It should just be constant fuel pressure, provided that there's enough fuel pressure on the bottom side of the regulator or the bottom side of the distributor to open it up. So the first thing to do, let's put the fuel injector tester on it, check the pressure, and see what it looks like. All right, first thing to do is we're going to open up our kit, and this comes with a little adapter where this is going to screw into right here. So we're going to take this off and sandwich this adapter in between the line here. So we'll need a 12 millimeter to pop that off. Okay, so we have a little fuel there, but it doesn't look like it's really under pressure. It's just kind of more dribbling. Well, isn't that something? My fuel pressure tester broke. How about that? Well, now what? All right, so I've got the CIS distributor on the bench here, and really one of the big keys to success on these things is cleanliness and organization. So on the bench, I've got, you know, a new set of rubber gloves. I've got my little just a 6 divider box here, dial caliper. I've got a marker to mark out, you know, cylinders 1, 2, 3, and 4. I've got a T27 Torx bit, some carb cleaner, and the final thing is I've got a good set of instructions on repairing that K-jetronic fuel distributor that'll kind of walk me through step by step. Since I've never done this before, you know, we're going to walk through this thing together and figure it out on our own. I've heard there's a high failure rate on these things, on rebuilding them, but, you know, I figure as long as you're meticulous about it and you follow instructions and you take your time, make sure everything's clean and adjusted properly, then, you know, it really can't be that much more difficult than a carburetor, right? Let's find out. So the first step says to measure the depth of the initial nut control plunger position, and a basic kind of off-the-shelf is 0.6 millimeters. So we're going to measure from the outside upper lip here down to that little plunger, and it should be, let's see, this says 0.1 millimeter, and it does look like it's actually sticking out a pretty good bit. I wonder if someone's been in this thing before and adjusted it, because that's way out of spec. Well, let me take this apart. We're going to start with, I think it's a 19 millimeter. We're going to remove the sleeve and then the nut. And yeah, this thing's been messed with before because the retaining sleeve wasn't locked in place. There's a little tab and it was bent down. Unfortunately, that means someone's messed with this thing. Next step says pull out the control plunger, and this should just fall right out, and it did. And that looks actually in really good shape, with the exception of just a little dirt on the end here. We're not going to clean this. I'm just going to wrap this up in a towel, a paper towel, and set it aside so that that doesn't get damaged. Okay, next thing is record the position of the kerf mark, which is that little indentation there, on the aligning the control plunger barrel as indicated by the marker. On this one, it's pointed towards cylinder 3. So I'm just going to make a mark here so that we know where it's going. Finally, it says unscrew the Torx bits, or the Torx screws, with a T27. All right, next it says to separate the two halves of the fuel distributor. The upper and lower half will often stick together, and sometimes you have to use heat. And this one's not coming right apart. So I'm going to grab a heat gun. We're going to heat this thing up. It says to it not to exceed 80 degrees Celsius. So just put some heat on it, and then it should slowly separate. So let me be right back. Okay, we are at 76 degrees, 70 degrees, somewhere around there. And this thing should now just, it's moving, it's hot, come right apart. I'm gonna have to get some gloves. As it's cooled down, hopefully you can see that it's separated just a little bit. You can actually kind of see light through it if you're holding your head right. So it says, use only your hands, simultaneously pull the two halves apart. You can wiggle them just a little bit, but not more than 5 to 7 millimeters. All right, so it's coming apart. It's just very, very slow. Okay, so I just gently separated these a little bit more, and this couple of the 3 of the little pucks here fell out along with one of the springs. So I'm going to do my best to try and get these back into some semblance of order here. All right, this is number 1. We'll go in the 1 hole, 2, and 3, and by default number 4. And unfortunately, the only one of these where I know where it goes is number 2. So we're just gonna put those in. Okay. Next step, it says, using only your hands, squeeze the barrel of the control plunger and remove the O-rings. So this actually was supposed to come out of here, but it came out on the top. So let me see if I can get this out now. Before I go too much further, it looks like there's a little plunger or spring retainer right there. Let's see if that's going to come out. Okay, that was number 3. This is number 2. This is number 4. And by default, this guy is number 1. Okay, so I was able to grasp the plunger and pull it out here. Let's see if you can get this on so you can see it. And there's 4 little fuel passages, each one with an O-ring on it. Okay. So now we can really see how this works. So you've got the fuel that comes up through the center here, and it's got this little passage here that corresponds to a hole in the top part, and fuel comes out that little hole, sealing against the body, and then goes out to the injector. So we are going to pull the O-rings off one at a time. And then these little silver things are springs, and all we have to do is just slightly squeeze and pull them out. That one was number 3. Okay, I'm going to set that aside for the moment and come back to it, because what I really want to see is actually the diaphragm here. So now you can see the diaphragm, and already I can see that there's a tear in it. If you look super closely right there, you see that? There's a tear right there, there's a tear right there, there's a tear right there. Yep, this is the main reason why the car wasn't running right, I think, because it's just bleeding off all that fuel pressure. Okay, underneath this, there should be even more little springs. So I'm going to take note of where my my orientation is. So 2, 3, yeah. So this is 1 and 4. I'm going to gently peel this back. All right, there's our diaphragm. Okay, so I picked up this kit on eBay from Salvox, and it apparently has all of the O-rings and diaphragms and everything that we're going to need in order to rebuild the CIS system. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually replace the O-rings that are on the barrel plunger here. Actually, I'm going to pull those off and then just clean this out with carb cleaner, then put new O-rings on. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but right down in the very bottom of the little channel where the O-ring sits, let's see if the focus is there, you can see a little slit, and that's where the fuel comes out. All right, now that we've got new O-rings on the plunger here, the next big one is there is an O-ring down in the bottom here, and I have a blunt tip, so not a sharp pick, a very blunt pick, and I'm just going to very gently try and ease that out of there. Looking in the kit, we've got another big fat O-ring that matches that one pretty well. And drop it right back down into that groove after I clean it. Again, no sharp tools to get that in, because you definitely don't want to nick that little O-ring, because fuel is going to come out the bottom. This is actually the bottom. Next up, we're going to take our little springs, put them back in the barrel plunger, and have them sticking out a pretty good bit, because we want to stick an O-ring onto that. So we're going to do all 4 of them. Okay, next we're going to get out our O-rings for the barrel plunger and place them around the springs. Don't worry about how far it's sticking out yet. And then very gently we're going to press the springs in just to the depth of the O-ring, because we don't want any of that sticking out. We want it to be just flush with the O-ring like that. We're going to put a little light silicone grease on all the O-rings and then get ready to reinstall it. Now that I've got a little light silicone grease, we're going to make note of our little kerf, our little indention here. And remember, it was pointing towards number 3, which is right there. We're going to very gently start pressing it into place, aligning it with the number 3 cylinder. And it would help if I put it in right side up. All right, let's try this again. Okay, there's our number 3. We're going to align it with the little kerf mark and very gently press this into place, making sure that we don't pinch any of the O-rings. It should just slide just like that until it snaps. Perfect. Almost done. Next step is to start reinstalling all of our little spring cups and springs before we get the diaphragm in place. So these just drop back down from the hole they came from, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And next should be the springs. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then finally the little cup. And if you notice on the little plastic cup, let me grab one out here, there's a little ridge, and that's where the spring rides. The spring should sit right in the middle and float over, and that little cup should float over. Okay, got all those in place. Next step is new diaphragm. And if you notice, the old diaphragm had one hole over it, so we just need to make sure that the new diaphragm lines up where this hole was where this hole is. And it's pretty easy to see where it goes. There's just one additional hole right there in the middle. Just like that. And then finally, we're going to drop this guy back on. All right. Number 3, lined up with number 3. All of our O-rings are in place. This should just sandwich in place just like that. All right, now that I've got all of the Allen or the Torx bits back in, I'm gonna have to actually bust out my old bicycle tools and torque this thing in place. So I dug out my Park Tool inch, pound, and Newton meter torque wrench for working on carbon bicycles, and we're gonna torque these things down to, it says 7 to 10 Newton meters of torque. Now that these are all torqued down, we're just going to drop a little plunger in, just going to coat it with a little light engine oil. That'll slide down, and then we'll get to set the depth here to 0.6 millimeters, and we'll be done. So you can see there's like zero resistance. It's just falling by its own weight. That should be perfect. Let's get it back in the car and make sure that works. All right, so I've got everything back together. You can see that the distributor's back in place, got all the lines tight. I haven't pressurized the fuel system yet, but that's going to be the next thing. So I'm just going to cycle the key a few times, bump it over, make sure that we get enough fuel pressure in here, check for leaks, and then see if it'll crank up. Okay, so I've got it all back together, and I did just jumper across the fuel pump relay just to make sure that it didn't have any leaks, and doesn't look like any fuel leaks. So let's try and fire this thing up. Okay, here goes. It's a little rough. I think it's just low on fuel or fuel pressure. There it goes. Nice idle. There goes cold start. No leaks. Let's let it warm up and go take it out for a drive. All right, so just pulling out of the driveway, initial impressions are the throttle response is so much crisper than it was. So I really didn't expect, sequential injection like throttle response, but man, this is a lot sharper than it was. Second observation is it is a lot smoother. The engine just seems to run so much better than it did, and I thought it ran pretty well before. It's revving over 3,000. And wow, it is so much smoother than it was. I cannot believe how much of a difference just that little thing made. I mean, I guess it was having some problems for a while, but I never really noticed it because I thought it ran pretty well. The other thing that I'm noticing just right off the bat is before on deceleration, it would have like a lean pop through the exhaust, and it doesn't do that anymore. Wow, this is pretty remarkable. The car is running absolutely flawlessly right now. Wow, I am stunned. I am legitimately stunned. I did not think that something so simple would make such a tremendous difference in the way the car feels. That's full throttle, runs great. Good, more power than it had. All right, I'm gonna try a little full throttle. Chirp second. Chirp third. I cannot tell you how happy I am with the way that this turned out. So we still have a few more little things to do to wrap up on the car before it's, I'm going to call it done. I reached out to Kyle at only 9:44, and he is sending me another seat cover to replace the one that I tore on the passenger seat. There's a few other things, like the backup lights don't work, and you know, the wiper motor is slow, and things like that that I really want to address before I'll feel comfortable saying that it's ready to go to its new home. If you like the kind of things that we're doing here in this channel, one free way that you can support us is by clicking on that subscribe button and hitting that bell to be notified when any new videos come out. That lets me know that you like this kind of content, that you want to see more of it. Thank you so much for watching. God bless. We'll see you next time.